Well, good morning and welcome. Good to have you all here with us today. We're excited to bring together this panel of experts in the private equity industry to have a conversation about the value and the impact of management teams as we think about heading into 2024. My name is Matt Brubaker, and I'm the CEO of a firm called FMG Leading. We're a human capital strategy advisor, helping investors and management teams align their people strategies with their growth aspirations. And we've assembled a panel here today that includes members of our own team as well as our clients to engage in this conversation about what happened in 2023, what are the implications for how we begin planning for 2024, and to bring to those of you who participate with us both a different way of thinking about how we engage our management teams and also some practical tips and tools and behaviors that can benefit us as we pursue value creation through the people who make up our businesses. So first of all, I'd like to introduce our panelists today and give each of them a few minutes to introduce themselves. So Matt, D, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Great. Thanks, Matt. And thanks to everyone who made this possible, both panelists and attendees. My name is Matt DiFrancesco. I'm a vice president with Copley Equity Partners. We're based out of Boston with an additional office out in Denver, Colorado. We are a generalist private equity firm. A lot of our focus has been on service organizations where human capital is really our greatest asset within our portfolio. My background prior to Copley was in digital infrastructure investment banking. Spent the last 12 or so years in various roles within M&A, both advising and investing.
Great. We'll go to you, Will.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Nice to be with you on this conversation. This is a fun one for us. So, Will Bush III, I lead portfolio company transformation here at Tilia, which is a Chicago-based private equity firm focused exclusively on control investments in the food supply chain. So, we've made 8 platform investments since 2017. My work is mostly focused on the people, process, structure, and system side that actually scales our investments. So my background actually fits with that very nicely. I've spent almost 2 decades doing M&A and turnaround and growth transformations for a variety of firms, one of which was FMG Leading. So I'm a proud alum and excited to sit here and have a conversation with you that hopefully is helpful.
Sounds great. And Ben.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Ben Herman. I'm a partner at LightBay Capital. We're a Los Angeles-based private equity fund investing our second fund, which is just over $1 billion. We focus on service-based companies, so businesses where people are the key differentiator across 2 verticals, one healthcare, and the second business and consumer services. Actually, a very flexible approach to how we invest. We can do majority, minority deals. Ultimately, the 2 things that we're looking to invest around are secular tailwinds, so good industries, and then number 2, great leaders. We recognize, I think, the value that people bring in driving results, for us and for employees and for the system, and have worked with FMG in the past to try to get that right.
Ben, Ann.
Good morning, everyone. Thrilled to be here with you, and so grateful to share this time together with my esteemed colleagues. I am a senior practitioner with FMG Leading, and I've spent the last 2.5 decades in the areas of M&A, large-scale transformation, culture development, executive assessment, and most recently, human capital due diligence. I've worked across sectors, starting my career with Ernst & Young, from technology and industry sectors. Most recently, the last 5 years, double-clicked into private equity, really enjoying that. Focused in 2 primary areas, team alignment, human capital due diligence, and executive assessment. And I'm so thrilled to be here with you. Today, I'm in snowy Utah.
Nice.
Nice.
All right, Mitch.
Grateful to be here. Nice to see everyone here on the panel and looking forward to our time together. So my name is Mitch. I lead our investors practice here at FMG Leading. And basically that means I help firm leaders stay focused on what I like to call the value stack. So it's helping them stay focused on alignment and never underclubbing what it means to actually get and stay aligned with their portcos and their investments. The second part of that is talent, ensuring that the right people are in the right roles, but also that they're getting the right support. And then lastly, conditions for execution, which some might call culture, but some people are allergic to that word here in the investors practice. And so we call that conditions for execution, basically deliberately creating the right environment for performance to reach success. And before I led our investors practice for several years, I was leading our executive advising and coaching practice. Excited to be here.
Thanks. Well, again, we've assembled a great panel, and we think the conversation today will be instructive and interesting as we set our sights on setting a plan for 2024. And of course, a plan can be seen really simply as a budget and a spreadsheet and growth aspirations, but the reality is the people who are going to execute that plan right now are in a precarious spot. And so I guess I direct our first question to our investors on the panel, to Matt and Ben and Will, which is to talk to us a little bit about what you've seen this year. It's been an unusual year. Certainly, there's lots of coverage in the media about where, about capital waiting to be put to work, certainly a capital markets challenge as well. Talk to us about how this year has been for you, the impact on your investments, and any insights you've gained. How are you sharper and better at the end of this year as a result of what you've seen?
Sure, yeah, I'll start off here. It's been an interesting 2023. I think a lot of the uncertainty this year has slowed the momentum we were seeing from kind of late 2020 through really late 2022. Matt, you just described some of that media coverage, but I think some of the things we're seeing in the business environment are pretty consistent to what we were seeing in late 2022. Geopolitical tension and rising inflation and interest rates, stock market volatility, significant downside risks and headwinds that have really caused us as investors to more or less look inward. A lot of where our focus has been over the last really 12 months has been changing the cadence and thinking about the ways in which we interact with our portfolio company management teams. There's not given some of the uncertainty and just where we are in the present point of this economic cycle, there's not as clear-cut a path to expansion and profitability and resilience. So we have been kind of rethinking our models of engagement. We're more focused on supporting the portfolio, more focused on coaching our management teams through the disruptions that may lie ahead, mitigating some of the risks they currently face, and then steering them towards kind of longer term optimal growth. And that's come with more involvement from our portfolio growth team. The reality of the situation we're in now and how we're thinking about 2024 is we're navigating waters that both sponsors as investors and operating teams really haven't seen before. So it's been a unique year and has certainly set us up for ways to kind of think about how we approach the cadence with which we work with our management teams in 2024.
I think you take all of the macroeconomic factors that Matt mentioned, and I think just like the margin of error is sort of what we're seeing. And so I think that manifests for us, in a couple ways. Number one, on the new deal investment side, I think we've always been focused on, culture. I mentioned that was new to me, sort of conditions for execution instead of culture. But one of the mantras, at LightBay is that culture drives people and people drive results. Right. On the new investment side, there's a war for talent, sort of significant labor inflation, in particular, sort of the first half of this year. And so having a company that people want to be affiliated with, and once they're there, they want to stay, is critical. Sort of one tool we think about doing with our executive teams or using with our executive teams is looking at sort of key employees and trying to map out engagement. And the scale is sort of if somebody came to them and offered them $1 more, would they leave? And if they would, they're not highly engaged. And so how do you get them to highly engaged? Because you don't want to lose your best people over a couple dollars. I'd say on sort of the existing portfolio side, another big focus for us has been around more real-time data, so that we can sort of identify people that are sort of outperforming and recognize them and promote them and give them more responsibility to support growth, sort of promoting from within with people that understand, an organization's culture is a hugely valuable, tool to hone. And then also, with folks that aren't getting the job done, to be able to intervene and performance manage or sort of replace those folks more quickly, just given the macro environment is more critical than ever.
Will, anything you'd add to that?
It's pretty well covered from the panel so far. I think just the double down. The only other thing I'd add to this is, we have a focus around Moneyball, so we don't want to guess about how things are doing. We want to know to the extent that we can. So we do a lot of analytics around the health of the workforce, the health of our customer relationships, because, in our mind, we're kind of like, yeah, things are different. The name looks different, but change is always constant. And so do we have nimbleness? Do we have good information? Do we have a set of operating beliefs, which is what we use in place of culture, that really gets everybody comfortable with the idea that, yeah, let's do the best we can. Let's fail fast, but let's also take action. So let's not get into these cycles where we're overanalyzing things and not making progress, but let's also be really smart about growth. Getting people comfortable with the context that things are hard, you can win, we will win together, and let's actually control what we can control. And then let's also be clear about when we don't win, what that looks like. So let's not have the boogeyman shadow effect in play, but let's actually demystify that so that we can get down the field a lot faster.
Well, that's a great comment there, Will, and it brings up a lot. I think I also wanted to just mention, which I should have done at the beginning, that for those of you who are participating in this, we will have a Q&A at the end, and there should be a button at the bottom of your screen where you can input those questions. We'll be collating those and get to them towards the tail end of our conversation. But I do have a follow-up, and it's actually a springboard on what you just said, Will, for our investors. How are you thinking about, or how are you approaching 2024 budget planning in light of the sort of malaise or the doldrums that the business environment has brought us in 2023?
Sure, I can jump on that since I kind of made the comment. One is operating in reality. So there's aspiration, and then there's reality, and then there's a middle ground in there. So again, what we're doing now is being very intentional about how do we inform a forecast with good data, but also set a conversation cadence where it's like, let's actually build a collective reality, AKA an operating plan that we can execute on. And so for our businesses, which primarily operate in a food supply chain, what we saw is a big drop off in volumes on the front half of the year, and then a big spike on the back end of the year. And that was mostly related to, people being very scared about, the scarcity of inputs and abilities to move things around in the supply chain. So people bought up a lot of things and then they held them. So what we're operating on right now is good information, conversations, and execution. So if we can close that feedback loop from information, execution, and let's learn and adjust, then we're actually seeing a lot more effectiveness in our planning and execution cycles. So food for thought.
Yeah, I'd say with our companies, we're trying to build up the budgets, honestly, with as much input from the people who are actually going to be responsible for executing against them as possible, in a way that's intuitive to them, right? A budget is something we look at the investor side. We deliver to our lenders with our businesses that have third-party financing, but ultimately we view it as a tool for management to try to drive sort of alignment and accountability around goals. And so building it in that way is one piece of it. And I think the second piece is adapting as situations change. Just going back to what we were talking about a minute ago, a ton of uncertainty, in particular, I think around the consumer in 2024. And so not getting too wed to saying, hey, here's the hiring plan, and we're going to stick to the hiring plan, right? If sales outperform, you got to adjust. If sales underperform, you got to adjust. I think what's key is, again, just sort of having everybody on the same page around how it's built up and what they can do to positively impact it.
Yeah, that's couple great points. I think Will's point on the reality of where things are is important. I think we're maybe a little bit ahead of thinking through next year's budget with most of our portfolio companies than we would be in a normal year, just because of the change in what we're seeing in the macro economy. And I think a lot of what we're doing is working backwards from where we want the endpoint of next year to be, and kind of setting up ways for us to manage through the end of this year so that we're set up for success in 2024, and making sure that there's that alignment with our leadership team that Ben's describing, and making sure the people who are operating upon that budget on a day-to-day basis have the resources they need behind them from us as investors, to execute upon that. So it's definitely been earlier than most years, like I said, and kind of a unique situation in weighing a lot of external factors that we don't necessarily have control over in the same way that we do over executing upon our budget. So
a lot of insight in those three comments, and we could drill down on just that piece of the conversation for at least another hour, and manage the things you can control and manage them exceptionally well is the one comment I would offer back as a unifying theme in each of what you've said. We can't change the macro, but we can absolutely change how we perform in it. And certainly that's how we approach it, and are hearing from a lot of other clients as well. I'm going to shift the conversation now to you, Mitch and Ann. You spend most of your time leading teams of people who are engaged with investors, and in particular with management teams. As you think about prioritizing investments of both time and resources to make sure management teams can be successful coming into next year, what are like the top two things you'd say we've got to make sure they're focused on A and B?
I'll jump in here first. Certainly with longer hold times, the leadership team is really the anchor for the organization, and being intentional about what are strategic priorities, having the discipline and the diversity of thinking, having the right stakeholders in the room to create the plan and revisit it. I've got some teams using more of an agile methodology to go through an iterative process, to use tools like strategy maps, where you have a single frame with the priorities, KPIs, who owns it, and what are the outcomes, considering both the short term and the long term, and how do we mitigate that. Many of the plans at times miss the mark on the people side, and with the war on talent, the need for heightened engagement, that definitely is a critical element of the plan. And I'd say lastly, the capstone is it's not a one and done, it's an iterative to communicate out, engage folks, get feedback, get your best thinking on the table. We have outside SME counsel weigh in on the plans. I think that's critically important. The level of transparency is needed in this marketplace.
Yeah, building on Ann, what you're saying, two things come to mind, Matt, with this question for me. One is it's especially important not to take trust for granted. And by that, I mean, you got to take the time to actually do the hard work of building trust, and especially on that leadership team. So what I mean by that, I'm not talking about trust falls. I'm not talking about soft skills. I'm talking about getting your level of collaboration up to the sort of the no look pass, right? I can throw it before you're there because I trust you. And I think it was Adam Grant who recently coined the phrase, teams move at the speed of trust. I'll give him credit for that. I'm not sure if it was him, but that's true. That is a fundamental. And if teams don't take the time to invest in doing that on purpose, they're going to pay the price. And then the second thing would be, you can't choose between the human side and the performance side of making things work better. You have to do both. And so it's not enough to just be smart and work hard. You have to be wise about how you work with people. And that means you got to sort of understand, what do they need to perform at their highest level? Some need a little more carrot, some need a little more stick. Bottom line is, the golden rule doesn't work in leadership. You can't lead as you like to be led. You have to actually lead as they need to be led. So those are the two things for me. It's leading through that lens of wisdom, and it's building trust on purpose.
Well said. To our investors, anything you'd add to that as you think about management team development coming into next year?
I think what Mitch said just around leadership, I think, is a critical point. And with sort of the spike in sort of turnover and employee mobility last year, I just say in a lot of our companies, you're seeing people being promoted into managerial positions who've never led before, and you take for granted that people sort of have the tools to be successful in that. And so one of the things they don't, I think, is the punchline. And so, being able to connect, our businesses with resources, whether it be, we have an operating partner on our team who helps, or FMG Leading, to try to teach some of those skills sort of down within the organization, is huge in making sure that you can sort of have the conditions for success that we all want to see.
Yeah, I'll build on that real quickly. With a point around, for leaders, we're very objective about what is the work to be done, and then how does this leader actually map to that. And so, and the map actually has a double click into it, where we separate out, what are some of the things that person brings to the party, just in a raw talent perspective. You can't go to intensity school. You just have to be born with that. But then there are certain things that people can close in terms of, have you done a lot of M&A integration? Have you done commercial scaling? Have you built a marketing function? And once we're really clear about what are those things we can help this person go acquire, then we will work with, a leadership coach or an outside partner to help accentuate some of those capabilities that leader may be missing, or the leadership team may not have. So making things objective and being very specific about how our investments to the leader or the leadership team will materialize in a return for the team.
Well said, Will. I have a follow-up, and then we're starting to get some questions in the Q&A as well. So thanks for those. I see them popping in, which is half the battle, is seeing them. The question for you guys, Matt and Will and Ben, obviously financial performance is easy to measure. Investors are incredibly well known for their suite of tools and spreadsheets and documents to characterize what movement and growth looks like. It's far more difficult to identify what does a healthy or high-performing management team look like. How do you measure that? How do you quantify that? How do you look at across a portfolio of 15, 18, 20 investments and say green, yellow, red, right? What's your way of thinking about what a high-performing management team actually is and does, and how do you measure it?
Yeah, I think it's something I've actually talked to you about before, Matt. I think, some of our highest performing management teams are the ones that are the most forward thinking, as it comes as it relates to talent. I think linking perspective on kind of current talent to future plans and expectations for the business is an important component to some of the better performing management teams we have, rather than on past performance. So I think linking pre-deal talent with the post-close needs of the organization through an unbiased process is an important component from a talent perspective on where some of our highest performing management teams succeed and exceed. And then I think, and I'm still staying kind of within the guidelines of talent here, using a talent agenda to align our expectations as the sponsor with the management team is something that's important with some of our better performing management teams. A more kind of programmatic approach to human capital, and that's become increasingly important, this year in what some of the volatility we've seen.
I'm happy to go next. It's one of the most important and sort of challenging things I think we do as investors is trying to get the people right and then set them up for success. I don't have a perfect answer. It's really hard. I do think part of it comes down to just the results, right? It's what is within sort of the scope of an individual. Let's agree on how we're going to measure success and can they deliver. But I think so I think, right, just being very transparent in that scorecard around what are the tangible and sort of intangible things we're going to look for. I'd say putting that aside, and just sort of, beating the drum of sort of engagement. One of the things that we do with all of our companies is sort of within the organization, manage turnover and employee engagement. And so also just looking to sort of how well can leaders motivate their teams, and sort of using the data to help, lead us to the right answer in conjunction with the CEO and the executive.
I'll jump in on that. That's actually a good segue for our approach. One is the data. So we measure turnover, safety, some of the operational KPIs that influence our financial outcomes consistently on a frequent basis across all of our portfolio companies. And then specifically, we measure customer and employee health also. So again, when we say the word engagement, we can put a number to it. Not that the number is necessarily that important, but we can hold up a scorecard. And this is a part of our CEO's scorecard around how engaged is the team and ready are the team to deliver on the growth plan that you're leading. And we can track that over time to see if that's moving up, down, or staying flat. And then that comes with a set of actions that they can execute on, which we hold them accountable to. The same thing applies to the customer base for our portfolio companies as well. So again, we're putting numbers and quantifying a lot of the things that people kind of typically say are harder to do. My job and our job is to actually make that not so hard to do. And then the last thing is speed to value. So we have an exit checklist. We have a value creation plan. We have budgets and things that are normal operating deliverables. How fast and how well do those things get done? So highly functional teams get those things done very well, and they're very coherent, and people feel good about the process. Teams that are less functional have the opposite. So not a science, but a good indicator for us.
Thanks, team. Those are great insights. And I'm going to actually bring that same question to Mitch and Ann. High-performing management team, how do you measure it? How do you coach towards it? What does that look like on the practitioner side as you engage in portfolio companies?
Thanks, Matt. I was actually going to jump in, so I'm glad you asked, because I agree with what Will and Ben just said about, ultimately the scoreboard is what matters most. The business metrics tell the story. The frustrating part of that is they can often be lagging indicators, right? Like that information can come a little bit too late in terms of measuring leadership performance. So one thing that I coach teams to do is to create feedback mechanisms. So as early as possible and as often as possible, you're actually giving and getting that feedback right there inside the climate of the team. And so to normalize, what does it look like to debrief and to watch film together and to be candid with each other on how we're doing? To me, that can create earlier indicators that can, some red flags can pop up so that you can do something before the business metrics suffer.
Agreed. I certainly looking at some of those lag indicators, but in present day, looking at the team dynamics and mechanics. Mechanics meaning are they aligned with regard to strategic priorities? Are there metrics around that? Are they tied to individual measures? Do they have the bench, the talent? How are they making decisions? Are they really holding the critical conversations, the unspoken topics? So looking both, do they understand roles, responsibilities? Are they managing conflict? Are they bringing the best data, the best information to the table? Are they transparent with their communication among the team and with the rest of the organization, their board? How well do they work with their board? So I think there are many factors, but coming down to the foundation of mechanics and dynamics to drive performance.
Again, there's so much in what has just been shared, and it actually is beginning to dovetail with some of the questions that are coming from our participants today. So I want to actually try to parlay, and my apologies if I don't merge them perfectly to try to get them all answered here. But one of the questions gets at that what versus the how that you just described, Ann. And I know I've talked about this individually with Matt and Will and Ben for years. How do you, in thinking about, so to sort of double click on management quality and high performing team, how do you develop a perspective on the how side, right? Not just the what, we've created the KPIs, but the how. What are you looking for that says this management team is leading in a sustainable way in terms of how they achieve the results that they're committed to? What would you say on that question?
I think one thing that we're currently doing is maybe having some of the conversations we described as answers to the last question earlier in the process to get a better understanding of the how post-close. So, formerly, we would kind of develop a value creation plan, a 90-day post-close plan. We're more involved with the management teams pre-close, and I would say management teams, but various members of that are critical to the top of the organization, not just necessarily the C-suite, so long as they're in the know on the transaction and better understanding the needs of the organization, so we can figure out the how post-close well before we actually invest. So pushing the timeline on that has been kind of a critical component to us hitting the ground running once we do make the investment, and it's different than it has been in past years for us.
Thanks, Ben.
I don't know if it totally answers the question, but I think in an area that we've actually seen a lot of value, and Matt sort of alluded to this with the 90-day plan, sort of post-close, sort of with LightBay, sort of bringing in capabilities is around project management, because I think a lot of the big initiatives are cross-functional, and a high-functioning team is one that's going to be able to achieve the most important priorities, which often are cross-functional. And so just making sure the frameworks exist so that a team can prioritize and track progress against those most important initiatives cross-functionally, is an area we found sort of a relatively inexpensive investment from LightBay can lead to really significant results with the companies we partner with.
All really well said. There's another question in the Q&A, and well, actually, there's a couple that start to get at the questions of either the psychology or the level of fatigue in management teams, recognizing hold times are extended, business performance is not what we thought it was going to be. I don't know why. It'd be an interesting thing to say how many of your portcos did a reforecast this year based on what they thought versus what they actually are going to achieve. So that's the world we're living in. What are you seeing trend-wise in terms of fatigue with management teams, burnout even? Exhaustion, and how are you approaching that proactively?
Yeah, we've been a little bit more cognizant about having an agenda and a playbook with our leadership team, and I've certainly realized some of that fatigue that's in the question, and I think we've been pretty good about having a response to that. So, things that have come out of the playbook are more surrounding expectations and timelines, communications, the cadence with which we will interact with our management teams, or the cadence with which they would like us to interact, so that they're able to kind of manage the day-to-day without with the appropriate oversight, more or less, and then a better understanding around the resources and investments and programs that we as a sponsor are able to provide, either through our portfolio growth team or other resources within the portfolio and investments we've made. But I think just making sure that our management teams understand that we are, supporting them and an extension of them, is really important, especially in, the type of year that we're seeing. I think the old adage is that CEO is the loneliest position in the organization. They bear the brunt of a lot of the tough decisions that need to be made to drive things forward. And I think, as investors behind them, it's important to kind of have that playbook and agenda to guide the relationship that we have with leadership.
I think I agree with everything Matt said. I think right, the concept that the CEO is like the loneliest job, I totally agree with. And so for us, I think there's two things we're trying to do to sort of alleviate and release some of that fatigue and tension. I think number one is just being like direct and transparent with stuff, that like what our CEOs are going through in particular is hard. that performance may not be, what they or we would want. But being, I think just like establishing that baseline of honesty and transparency so they feel like they can open up and sort of release that pressure, I think is very helpful. And then another thing we've had a lot of success with, in particular, Matt, working with you is just around finding, outsiders that can be a release valve for our executive teams and a sounding board. We like to think that, our management teams will come to us with every question and concern and problem, but I think a lot of them, rightfully so, want the opportunity to sort of develop their thoughts before they come with the solution. And having sort of an independent third party with experience, working with people in their position, we found to be a huge benefit.
Another thing we've done this year, which we hadn't previously, was connect our portfolio company CEOs in person at our offsite, actually. And I think that they identified a lot of the same pain points that are bringing that fatigue, and are, seeing a lot of the same challenges even across various industries. So I think having that kind of sounding board and resources within our portfolio is part of what I was describing. I think it's been very resourceful and helpful for our portfolio since we did that back in March or April. So
I'll offer a brief sort of non-question, more of a comment of my own, which is having worked with dozens of investors over the years, you can see in sort of harder economic times where the well-built habits of relating well to management teams come out. And obviously in a more challenging economic environment where targets are moving and budgets are slipping, it's easy to get hungry for data. And I would say the top quartile investors from others are separated by their ability to ask for the right data at the right times and not let anxiety drive constant requests for data into the management team, which creates an anxiety viral effect, right? So we're nervous, our investors asking for more stuff. We're trying to find the answer at the bottom of the heap here. And so understanding that what data and then more importantly, helping management teams through your CEOs understand the most critical actions that can be taken, because doing stuff to look busy is very different than saying, we know it's going to drive this and we know it's going to make this a kind of above the mean performance here, even though it's not going to be the one we thought we had. And obviously I'm sort of talking to folks who've been doing that for a while here, but makes a big difference. Which brings me to another thread, and I think an important one that you see referenced both in the chat and also some of our prep, which is best practices around engineering relationships between board and management teams. In some cases, you've got investor and a couple of founders with board roles. In other cases, you're bringing in independent board members with key areas of expertise. But what are some of your best practices right now around engineering relationships between management team and board?
Yeah, I think number one for us is just clarity around what the board's role is. I think one of the things I've seen happen in the past is you have a lot of smart people around the board table with a lot of ideas, and sort of management comes away confused and distracted. And so I think one thing that is best practice we see is having somebody on the board who is ultimately responsible for following up directly with the CEO to understand what he or she heard. And then to sort of communicate sort of what they heard, as the direction from the board, just so there is that clarity, of direction.
Yeah, that's actually very powerful and makes a big difference, Ben. One in addition to that, one of the things that we do is not sure if it's the best practice or not, but it's something we're trying. It is, we actually really intentionally set the table for a conversation, not just an update meeting where people are page flipping through things that they can read without being in a board meeting. So we actually agree on the front end, what are the prompts that we want to set up and actually facilitate conversation around so that we can tap into the collective intelligence sitting around the table. And it goes both ways. So you're not just a person showing up for a meeting and throwing ideas around. You are actually expected to contribute, and in some cases, facilitate introductions or execute with the CEO on some of the strategic initiatives. So I think the expectation setting and the communication and collaboration environment actually helps us max out that value quite a bit.
Yeah,
Mitch, Ann, I'm curious what you guys would add based on, again, your practice these days. What are you seeing as best practices between management teams and board members?
I think this is sort of between the lines of, sorry, Ann, between the
No.
lines of most of what I heard. And so two things come to mind. One is the time value of early agreements. I mean, it was sort of mentioned here. And I would say to sit down and actually ask questions like, what's good going to look like in our partnership? How will we get aligned? How will we stay aligned? Another good question is, how are we going to clean things up when it gets messy? Right. And so very intentional about how we engineer not just the actual work that we're going to do together, but the relationships in the work. So kind of a relational engineering. And then secondly, boy, I still remember learning this in 7th grade when the teacher wrote this word right across the chalkboard: assume. Don't assume anything. Be explicit, ask questions, stay curious, because assumptions get us in a lot of trouble.
My ads would be take time on the front end to invest, getting to know each other, outlining operating principles. What are our goals, objectives, when we're off in terms of our goals, managing conflict, how do we make decisions, how do we develop the board, how do we evaluate our performance, are we aligned to our agreements, and how do we know that? Those would be important elements: goals, roles, operating principles, and relationships, and tackling each one in an intentional way to evaluate board and leadership team performance.
Those are great comments. And again, each of these have lots of room to trickle. And we should write an article or something about this. My next question topic area for you, obviously, I think we're talking to folks who are interested in this, or we all wouldn't be here today, thinking about the alignment and the calibration of the people side of the business to execute on growth targets and goals. Having said that, it doesn't always work, right? And we, in our business at least, can talk about, hey, look, well, good strategy, right timing in the market. People end up being the X factor. It's sort of a mom and apple pie kind of a comment, pretty hard to argue with because we know what we know. But I'm curious, without sharing any names or proprietary information, can you tell a story of a situation in your own practice, your own experience, either an investor or an advisor, where you had all the pieces in place except getting the people part right? And what were the outcomes or the learnings from that?
I think, and without giving too much away, but I think where we've probably faced some of the biggest people challenges is in combining organizations, either tuck-in acquisition or buy and build strategy, and maybe not being as forward thinking on a clear reporting structure, and making sure there's strategic alignment well before we actually make the transaction. That includes, role clarity and kind of a clear organizational chart for what the go-forward entity is going to look like. A lot of that with one of our investments was handled in that, initial post-close period where we're doing a lot of our value planning and strategic initiative conversations. And this was a multinational organization operating in a couple different geographies with a couple different leadership teams, and also merging two businesses together. And I think that's, in that initial year, that was one of the biggest challenges with, couldn't really be captured in any budget, right? We needed to identify those challenges well before close so that we could execute upon them when we did make the investment. And it took a little longer, a couple of months into our hold to really get that right. And it certainly affected the budgeted year that I'm describing. So
I'd add it's hard, right? Because I feel like, especially at the C-suite, we develop deep relationships with folks. At least we try to on a personal level. And so whenever somebody is sort of not getting the job done, it's difficult. And so the bias is to wait, to wait too long. And the impact of that is, right, there can be collateral damage within the organization. You sort of lose time executing against an accelerated growth plan. And so what we try to do, I think, is, number one, talk to the board and our CEO that it's logical, it's natural as companies grow that sometimes you're going to outgrow somebody's skill set or sort of capacity to keep up, and try to be very direct and intentional with our leaders about what the expectations are and sort of how we see them performing versus those expectations. And I'd say when you get that right, and this has happened a couple of times with us, you have executives that come to you at about the same time you're making, the decision that they're not going to be able to elevate to where you need to, and sort of acknowledging it themselves. And that's the best case scenario, because then you have buy-in to transitioning them out in a sort of respectful way, and recognizing what they've contributed to the organization. At the same time, you get the right leader sort of in to the business, but it's hard.
I'll add a couple of points on that. I think it's been well covered. Pain is an important teacher in a lot of cases. And sometimes what we've noticed is you have a lot of leaders in some cases who have never lost before, who have never been in a situation where they've been down, at halftime, and they've had to come back and they had to fight their way out of things, because company transformation happens after there's a personal transformation. And so what we really focus on is, let's be very clear about what the expectations of a win look like. So let's hit these things along the way to getting to the outcome. And if you're not hitting those things, we're going to have a conversation so that no one is surprised about that. And even beyond that, we've already had conversations about beginning with the end in mind. So what does the transition look like, even outside of the current role that you're in? And so if you don't hit those expectations, then the conversation's more about, should we accelerate some of the transitions that we've already discussed? And are we already building a team that can go past your leadership? Because that is good leadership. So having those conversations, which aren't necessarily very comfortable to have early, has been very helpful. Making very clear expectations and revisiting those expectations on a frequent basis is very helpful. And then obviously building the next generation of talent is also helpful too, so that it's not a crisis. It can be more of a transition, to your point, Ben.
Those are great answers. I'm going to bring it to you, Mitch and Ann as well, but I'll just add my own little piece there. It's a takeoff of what you said, Will, which is, most of us as leaders driven to perform have a track record and some history of being able to show consistent incremental or transformational growth, and are unaccustomed to failing, unaccustomed to admitting failing, and certainly unaccustomed to asking for help. And yet these are the kinds of circumstances where help is required, and is often the only real difference between success and failure. Thinking about those integrations and the role clarity and all the things that need to happen. And so cultivating an environment where leaders are predisposed to say, I don't know that I know how to do this without your help, before it turns into a 4-alarm fire. That is the X factor again and again and again. When a leader feels compelled to hide the bad news until they can possibly can't conceal it anymore, versus saying, hey, we're a little bit of a pickle here. I'm going to need your advice. Here's what my plan is, but I'm not where I thought it would be. That's like a 1 in 1,000 conversation with most CEOs, present company included. And yet lots of value is created when those conversations happen. So I would just say, whatever you can be doing as either an investor or a member of your management team to cultivate the possibility of that conversation, you're going to drive huge value.
Hey,
Mitch,
Matt, can I add
Yeah.
one other point on this is, remember the fact that these are human beings too. I think we all assume that, but leading with that and reminding people that look, hopefully no one's going to die in this situation, but performance is performance. You have wins, you have losses. Our job is to relate to you as a human being. And yes, we're trying to get to a collective outcome, but more importantly, what you can agree to and what you can expect from us is that we're going to treat you like a human all throughout the process and honor you in ways that, like Ben mentioned, throughout this too. So just another thing to keep in mind that I think we know, but sometimes get lost in high performance environments.
Well said. Ann, Mitch, 30 seconds each.
I have just one add, kind of in line with this thinking, and knowing when to make the hard decision of that transition, and reminding leaders, we've got a whole audience watching around how this is managed and holding one's dignity in place during a transition is very, very important. It can either be handled well or have disastrous impact on kind of the culture.
Well said.
Yeah, and I'll build on that. I'll say it has disastrous impact on the culture and then therefore the value of the business. You know, and so Matt, I was thinking of, there was one client I was working with who I think underestimated the complexity of several acquisitions that they were doing. And it wasn't so much that they didn't have a plan, they just weren't thinking of what Will had mentioned a couple minutes ago, the human side. And what's all this ambiguity and lack of clarity and newness and change going to bring about? Completely underestimated the frustration and resistance. And I think they're actually still trying to recover 18 months later. And so, you know, you just can't underestimate how complex and how much hard work it takes to pay attention to the fact that these are human beings. And that means we have to work as if there's more than just what we see on the spreadsheet. It's winning hearts and minds.
Yeah, that's really well said. It's easy to look at a successful exit and a roll up and think, wow, we want to do that. That's a very refined playbook for even the best investors. So our closing statement here, we only have a couple of minutes left. Each of our panelists knows this statement and is ready to answer it. But your final sentence is, in 2024, I hope the teams we work with stop doing what and instead focus on ... So we'll go around the horn, give you each a chance to say your final statement. Starting with Matt D.
That's good. Mine was in 2024, I hope the teams we work with stop, and this is a little long-winded, but kind of captures, I think, a lot of what we went through. Stop utilizing the same human capital strategy they have historically. I think we're just in a year of change and need to pivot to a more programmatic approach to the human capital needs of the business that align with the current economic environment and the future plans for the business. So that wasn't Mad Libs one word, but I hope that covers my thoughts on it.
Spot on. Will.
Yeah, we hope they stop, I guess, being very loyal to their old ways of thinking and be very open-minded to doing new things, specifically informed by the customer. So more customer focus, more customer listening, engineering their leadership style and configuring the organization to the customer's needs will be a big win for us. And that's our focus for 24.
Awesome. Thank you. Ben.
Spend more time focusing on the things that really matter. I think a lot of our executive teams, right, especially if they're functional leaders, can put on blinders and just think about what are their day-to-day responsibilities without thinking about what's going to really move the organization forward, and trying to reallocate some of that time to the big priorities that are going to create a stronger organization, create equity value is a focus for us.
Spot on. Anne?
I would say my hope is that firms that I'm working with really embrace new ways of looking at problems and issues, particularly as it relates to human capital, to level up, because I think we're facing conditions we've never seen before. And we need our best thinking at the table and having the courage to implement and think differently, ask different questions. And so that's my hope.
Spot on. Mitch, you get the final word.
All right, I would say in 2024, I hope that teams stop thinking that being smart is enough and start instead to focus on making decisions, all things considered.
Brilliantly said. We're grateful you've spent this hour with us. There's lots more to discuss. Thanks for those of you who had added questions that we weren't able to answer. We look forward to being in touch with you all again soon. Take care.